Michael Brecker, John Coltrane, Sonny Rollins, Charlie Parker, Joe Henderson, Dexter Gordon, Stan Getz, Ken Adderley, Dave Friedman, Rick Magizza, Chris Potter, Mark Turner. How did the masters practice improvisation, and what can we learn from that? I started pretty early to make music. Both of my parents are classical musicians, so I also started on classical clarinet. And it took me until my early 20s to become seriously interested in jazz and improvisation. And at the age of 21, I began my studies in jazz saxophone at the conservatory in Würzburg, Germany. I just had one major problem. Whereas I was a pretty good musician thanks to my classical background, I didn't really have much background and experience in jazz and improvisation. Jazz is an extremely competitive field, and if you want to have any kind of career, you have to be really good at it. So one question was extremely important for me from the beginning. How can I become as good as possible, as quickly as possible? I somehow had to find a way to close the gap between me and other musicians that were introduced to jazz much earlier. Now, more than 12 years after my obsession with jazz started, and after having practiced for more than 10,000 hours, I think I found a few pretty good answers to this question. And in this video, I want to share them with you. I think these insights can help you avoid the same mistakes that I did and also make your journey as a jazz musician more successful. So let me show you what I learned, and stick around until the end of the video, because then I will share my most favorite, in my opinion, most effective way to practice jazz improvisation. So when I started to study at the conservatory, obviously the first question was how to start out with practicing jazz improvisation, because I didn't have a lot of knowledge until then. And one of the big mistakes I made in my development is that I thought that it's very important to have your own unique voice from the get-go, meaning that you're also not supposed to copy any other players. I could have not been further from the truth. It's really essential to, in the beginning, forget completely about your own voice and just copy whatever you like to copy. So if you have any favorite solo from your favorite saxophone player, just try to figure out one phrase of this solo and practice it in several keys. In all of my research that I did in how my favorite musicians became so good, they all copied their heroes and their favorite musicians in the beginning. For example, think about Michael Brecker, who copied Sonny Rollins, John Coltrane and Joe Henderson, or also John Coltrane copying Charlie Parker and Eddie Lockjaw Davis, among others. Everyone, except for maybe Thelonious Monk, copied other players and sounded in the beginning not as unique as they would sound later when they built their foundation. So don't be afraid to learn things from other people. It's much better to be a good copy of John Coltrane than to have your own voice, but it's not very developed. Another big mistake I made was I was losing myself in technicalities. I practiced so many technical things that it often distracted me from what sounds musically best. So my advice for you would be to practice technical exercises, but then try to do something musical with this. So compose lines that sound good to your ears, or also improvise slowly using the technical things that you practiced before, and listen closely if it sounds musical. I remember that Chris Potter gave a masterclass. I think you can find the video on YouTube somewhere, and he's talking exactly about this. He would be bored quite quickly practicing technical exercises, so he always wants to go to a more creative approach as soon as possible. And I think this is really wise to do. I've also thought a lot about the question how highly talented people like Michael Brecker, Chris Potter, or also Charlie Parker practiced music and improvisation. And I think one thing they have in common is that they had pretty early an idea on how they want to sound like. Chris Potter also is saying in one interview that he pretty early knew what he wants to play like. So to develop this, you have to listen to music, and I would recommend to you to really treat it like a science project. So take music you like and try to analyze it from every angle possible. For example, take a look at the arrangement. How do they arrange the intro, the outro? How long are the solos? Have the solos one peak, or do they have several peaks? Is everyone soloing? Also in the solos, for example, Joe Henderson, is he only playing lines, or is he also playing more sounds? How does he treat rhythm? So there are a lot of things that you can learn from just listening and analyzing music. It will give you a clear goal of where you want to go. I've wasted a lot of time just improvising mindlessly over play-alongs. And this can be really harmful to your musicianship. When you play with a play-along, you don't have to keep time. The play-along anyway often doesn't sound very swinging, so you practice basically to not play with a very good feeling because it doesn't inspire you to practice in a swinging way, for example. My advice to my younger self would be restrict the time just noodling around with play-alongs. If you practice with a play-along, make sure you have a clear goal and you don't just play on for 10 minutes without having any result from it. I definitely had times where I just pressured myself so much to become a better improviser that I lost all the fun in playing. Because when you're learning to be a better musician, all the time the question is, what can't you do yet and what do you need to fix? And you shouldn't become too immersed in this question. So keep a certain distance and you will have more fun, and this will actually also lead to progressing faster and learning faster. Stick to the stage you are in. I think this is really crucial to have in mind already in the beginning when you're starting out as an improviser. If you're still a beginner, make sure to learn the language and don't focus on developing your own voice. But if you're not a beginner, and this is the stage I'm in right now, you want to slowly get away from focusing so much on what your favorite musicians did, but rather focus on what you want to do and what is maybe special about you as a musician. And this is quite frightening in the beginning because you don't have any guarantee that you will succeed in this. But if you really want to become an artist and develop your own voice, there's no way around it. You have to be at some point brave enough to go for what you like most and to believe that you are able to develop your own voice as an improviser. So, as I said before, I thought a lot about how to practice jazz improvisation most effectively. And I came up with one exercise that is extremely simple and I think the most natural way of practicing jazz improvisation. And actually, in all of what I researched about my favorite musicians, I'm 100% convinced that this was one of the main ways they practiced jazz improvisation. And what you're practicing is called slow improvisation. For this, you don't need any play-along. You just need your instrument. You can take a blues, or if you're a beginning improviser, it might be better to just take one chord, for example, a C major chord. And then you play one phrase, you check if it was what you intended and if it sounded good, and then you play the next phrase. This is really the most natural way I found to practice improvisation. And this exercise brings together all the other things you learn. So what you listen to, the technical exercises that you practice, the things you learn from transcribing, everything you bring together now and practice it in a way that you will later really use it in your improvisations. Let me show you with an example how slow improvisation looks like. That's it for today. Thanks for watching, guys. Don't forget to subscribe and like the video, and see you next time.